Hello and welcome to another Electronic Eremite Reviews. I'm your host speaking, the Electronic Eremite. Today we're going to look at Twilight Imperium Rex, Final Days of the Empire. Let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I'll go ahead and open this box here. It's a little stuck. Let's, what? Wait, what is this? How did this get in there? How did Dune get in this box? Alright. All fun aside, we are talking about Rex today, which is the reprint by Fantasy Flight Games of the old Avalon Hill game of Dune, based on the classic game system here. You see that they have credited based on the classic game system by Bill Eberl, Jack Kitteridge, and Peter Ulutka. Sorry about that. Sorry about butchering that name a little bit. It is the classic game of sort of diplomacy, board strategy, I'm thinking area control, and of course betrayal that came out of the, I believe, mid-70s and had many iterations. You can see that on Board Game Geek. You can see some of the history of Dune leading up to, because of a squabble over the rights with the Frank Herbert's estate, not being able to actually reprint this as Dune, but instead as a Twilight Imperium universe. So today I'm going to talk about this. I have not actually played Dune. I am familiar with how the game was set up, and I'm familiar with some of the aspects of the game because I watched all of the history videos, some of the really excellent history videos out there, talking about the rules and thinking about the different strategies. But I haven't played Dune myself, so I'm going to talk about Twilight Imperium Rex, Final Days of the Empire, on its own merits, and talk a little bit about comparisons with Dune, because some of my gaming group indeed had played Dune and were huge Dune fans. So let me go ahead and get these pieces out, and we'll talk about them and look at the mechanics. Welcome back. Alright, what you're looking at the backdrop here, underneath all of the pieces I've got, is actually the gigantic board. It is quite a large board. It has all of the places, and then you can see the connectors. Let me move this around a little bit. If that doesn't make any of you seasick, you can see it is a huge board. I was very surprised because the box for Rex is actually your sort of general smaller box Fantasy Flight game. It's a square box, and so when this board came out, and it is just gigantic, it is extremely detailed. You can see underneath you've got the little city, you can see the large places. The places are quite big, so you can keep track. Now, with that all down, I will say that I'm not a big fan of the board. It looks like Arkham Horror. I love Arkham Horror. I've played tons of Arkham Horror, but the thing is, once you've played so much Arkham Horror, when you see this board, you're kind of like, oh, it's Arkham Horror. Wait, no, it's not. And there's anything like Arkham Horror here. So in that sense, it does become sort of this confusing thing for a while. If you're a big Arkham Horror fan, when you see this, you're like, well, am I Arkham? Am I on Mechatol Rex? Am I on Dune? Well, you're definitely not on Dune. So that's the big difference. It is not the circular board. And another thing I think that Dune players, big Dune fans, will have a problem with is that the Storm, which is now the Soul Fleet, you get this really nice, neat plastic thing that will move around the board, and it's nice and large because sometimes it goes over an entire sector like it does here of 2 places, and then it will move, and occasionally it will be only over one, destroying things as it goes around, destroying people who are not shielded, and influence that's not shielded. So this is the Storm, or now it is the Soul Fleet, and it moves around the board taking things out and blocking people from moving through it, blocking people from moving out from under it. But what I found a bit confusing, and also when you're putting influence out on the board, influence is now the money. Let me show you what it looks like. Here's the influence tokens. This is the money, or as they used to call it in the old Dune, this is spice, and it occasionally will pop up in certain areas of the city. And this is what you'll largely fight over, other than the victory conditions of getting the strongholds, which appear to be on each corner of the map and then one in the very middle. You can sort of see I've covered one up. This is a stronghold because it has the red. There's also a spaceport and is also shielded, and these do things, different things. The strongholds, you have to have a certain number of them in order to win the game. Spaceports allow your men to move farther, and shields will allow you to survive if that soul fleet comes over you. Although you will be trapped there, you can't get out. Now what I was thinking was a little confusing is that each of these sectors are numbered. So if you can see 17 here. Okay, so 18 is actually, there's two 17s, one of them is off them. Let me pull that a little bit, let me just do this. So you have two 17s, and then it will go to 18. So when the Soul Fleet here is moving, it will cover those, and then it will move through to 18. Now that seems pretty clear, but sometimes these pathways are a little wonky, how they've graphically designed this. And I found it a little hard to keep track of all the different numbers. This may just be me. I haven't had a huge amount of time studying those numbers. When you don't really think of the numbers in other than to put out influence and where the Soul Fleet's moving. When you're actually doing your moves, the numbers don't become too much of an issue unless you're playing the Terrans, which then you can only really deploy on one side of the board. So that becomes an issue for the Terrans, but otherwise the numbers are just sort of meaningless. So in a sense, you don't really, I didn't get a chance to think about the numbers in the several games that I've played. So I'm a little confused as to how they move around, and we were always hunting for it. You've got these names, and they don't really mean anything to me thematically. A cultural sector, the Hall of Records. If you've read all the stories of Twilight Imperium, okay, they might mean something to you. The Hall of Maps comes up all the time in the stories. But it is something you have to get over with, particularly if you're a Dune player. You're going to have to look at this, what I call Arkham Horror in Space map, and overcome that hurdle. So I showed you the influence markers. Everything, of course, is high quality Fantasy Flight. You would expect out of Fantasy Flight that the cardboard is thick, the board is thick, the card stock is good. Everything is very high quality. Here are your units. They're nice hexes, which are neat. The only difference are that you have for the Lazex, which are the Empire in Dune, you have these larger ones, which are mechanized here in Rex. I believe they were Sardaukar warriors in Dune. But these are the larger hex. They actually count for 2 rather than 1 when you're in a battle. So those are really nice. Your leaders are these kind of weird shaped tokens. I'll show you why they're weird shaped. I can't get that too. There we go. They're kind of a weird shaped token like so. I will show you why they're weird shaped in a moment. There is a reason why they have this kind of pill shape with a little tab at the end. Cards are various different kinds of cards. The one thing that I will say they have done, and some people will say, oh man, and other people will say, oh that's great, is that they've removed any need to write anything down. So for example, here's the deck of Traitor cards that I'm going to show you here. This deck of Traitor cards. Now I have put sleeves on them. I'll talk about the sleeves in a little bit. But the Traitor cards, let's see if we can get that. There we go. This is got their name, it's got their number, it's got their race. The one thing I will tell people is that it can be a little confusing. They have no personality. Diplomat and Envoy, and they're both 5s. So we did have one time when someone was so excited they got to play their Traitor card, which basically allows you to win a battle free if your opponent plays this leader against you. And they played their Traitor card, they matched the number, but didn't realize that there are 2 of the same number, and they had actually played it on the wrong one and revealed which one they had without actually getting to win the battle. So that is something to be careful about. Make sure before you just get all excited and throw out your Traitor card that you are the names, and the names are not real easy to see on these little leader tokens. If I can get that to, there we go. See, they're not real easy to see. The number's very easy at a glance, but you have to have them read the leader name to you. And since everything is based on this sort of hidden information, that can even, asking what leader was that, that can even sort of give away that you might have one of their Traitor cards. In Dune, these traitor cards were written, you would pull the leaders and then write down which traitors you had. That is no longer applicable. They've also taken the win of the X-Cha or however you say them, which they can predict the win by saying, okay, first turn, we're going to, the Jolnar are going to win. This is the old Bene Gesserit power of predicting who is going to win, and if they got that right, then they would win the game instead. So they've now moved that into a token system, which is, I think, pretty nice. Having to write things down is sort of a honor system, and of course then you also have to worry about running out of the papers if it comes with it, and just using your own or copying them. So it's nice to have that. Some people will hate it because they love the writing down system. The races all have what I would say smaller than Twilight Imperium race sheets. They're very nice, they're very detailed, they have stories on the back just like in Twilight Imperium. Each one, of course, breaks the rules in different ways. They're very detailed over here. The text is even a little small, and here's your setup, which is also even a little small. They did sort of fit a lot of information on that card. The basics of the game are very easy. If you're wanting to play, I'm just going to go through a brief rundown of it. You're going to have influence put on the board in the beginning of the turn. Then you're going to have a bidding phase for strategy cards, which I will show you. These are different sort of things you can either use. You have event cards, what I would call event cards, or things you can play on people, like rapid mobilization and double agent. Then you also have battle cards, which come in either red attack or blue defense. And they work in a sort of rock, paper, scissors fashion. This is exactly like Dune, for those of you who are familiar with Dune. You have, for example, a biological weapon here. Let's see if we can get that to zoom in. Good. Biological weapon that will destroy someone's leader unless they committed the atmospheric ionizer, which will nullify the biological weapon. Now, if they had played the atmospheric ionizer and you had played an energy rifle, then you wouldn't nullify anything. That is not rock, paper, scissors. The energy rifle would still kill the leader, and that defense would be completely useless. They've added these event cards, and they do different things. Some of them allow you to take another move, like rapid mobilization. They've also have this is double agent, which actually is something a little bit different. Allows you to get more traitor cards, which I think is actually quite powerful. You will bid on those during the turn. You will bid on them blind, unless you're one of the races, the Jolnar, who gets to see what they are as they come up. So this game is really about using powers to break the rules and then faking out your opponents, in a sense, or helping out your allies, if you have some, to change the flow of the game. So, for example, when these strategy cards come out and they're face down, let's say we're playing a 4-player game, you would put 4 of them out. You're going to bid on them one at a time. The Jolnar can look at it before the bid and say, oh, you don't want that, or oh, yeah, you do, and maybe they're lying, maybe they're faking you out, maybe they're telling you the truth. If you're their ally, they kind of give you a sign. You have to do everything open in Rex. Some people used to house rules Dune, where you would go off in the other room and discuss. That's not how you're supposed to do it here in Rex. It says very clearly that any strategy has to be done openly. So you can't really go in and say, yeah, bid on that, it's a whatever. You can say what it is if you want to. We kind of thought that was a little unfair. We didn't have a clear sense from the rules whether or not you could tell the entire board, if your opponent won that and it was an energy rifle, whether you could say, oh, he just won an energy rifle. That was a little unclear. It says you can say your cards, but it doesn't say you can say the other people's cards. Anyway, that's something that needs to be determined. I think some people will want to play it one way and some people want to play it the other way. But it's all about taking information and changing it. And each side has different powers. Some people get money, like with the Empire, the Lazex, will get the money that you used, the influence that you used to spend to buy these cards when you bid. So you never want, if they're your enemies, you never want to bid too much, because you're basically just subsidizing your enemy. To move around the board can occasionally, to deploy onto the board, can cost money, and that the Hakan get those. They were the guild steersmen in Dune. So again, if you're their enemy, then you're just subsidizing. If you're their ally, then they get the money that you're spending, which is kind of nice. It's all about taking the rules of the game, which are actually fairly simple. You only get one move. This is something that some people have gotten wrong, so I think it is something to talk about. You only get one move and one deploy. So for example, if I'm gonna use the Lazex because they don't have any special movement rules. So if I'm existing here in the cultural section, I can move, and also existing, say, in the Galactic Council, I can decide one stack to move, either here or here, and move them up to 2 spaces. That's unmodified. So, for example, if I wanted to go from the cultural sector to the sector incarceratorum, I could, just like that. But then these guys couldn't move that turn. You then also get one deploy where you take people from your reserves, these are people who are not dead, but people who are in front of you, and then deploy them for a cost out onto the board. It costs 1 to just go anywhere that's empty. It costs 1 per person, and then 2 per person if you're deploying into a place with other people. And if you're allied with that person, you can't deploy or move in with them. You can never coexist with an ally, only with an enemy, because when you coexist, a battle will begin. So it's a fairly simple system. Now, of course, in general. Now, of course, the rules are broken by all of the different races, and that's what makes Rex kind of an interesting and dynamic game. So you have different things happening where the soul can only deploy on one side. They can move faster, but they do so for free, and they can move faster. And they can also know where the soul fleet is going to bombard next. They can tell. They got the numbers, so they know where it's going to go next. So that's information they can share. The Lazex are more powerful. They also get the money from the bidding. The X-Cha can decide if they want to go into a place with somebody and coexist peacefully or fight a battle, so that's also kind of neat. The Jolnar are basically the masters of information, and the Hakan are the masters of movement, and they can deploy anywhere on the board instead of moving around, so move from one space to any space on the board for a cost. And then you have the Barony of Letnev, and they're the master of treachery and weaponry. So everything changes depending on your races, and sometimes if you play with fewer than 6 players, you'll play with fewer races. You won't have the X-Cha if you have 5 players, and you won't have the Hakan if you have 4. And if you have 3, I believe it's Jolnar, Lazex, and Soul. Now, 3 players I think would be a very different or tough sell anyway. I believe that if you don't have 4 players, this may not be a game to play. I think 3 players would be a very difficult game, or at least not as exciting. We'll talk about why. These are the battle dial, so they're really kind of neat. The basic thing is that just to keep secret information, and I showed you these little guys, depending on what card you want to play. If you want to play a 1 attack and 1 defense, or 1 defense, or just 1 attack, or none, you decide where you're going to put your man. So if I were to put my man and he fits in there like that, that means I'm keeping him hidden. That means that I'm going to use my 6 leader and play an attack card. And then here you spin the dial to decide how many of your troops you will commit to the battle. The reason why you wouldn't just commit all your troops into a battle is that even if you win, you have to spend or kill that many troops. So if you've got 7 people and they've got 5 people, and you put 5 and they put 4, that means even if you win the number game, that means you're going to have to lose that 5 that you committed to the attack. And if they lose them all, but if they win, they would lose the 4 they committed to the attack. So you keep these hidden, and then you flip them over and you compare the numbers. You see what cards you played to see if the leader survived or not, and then you add it all up, and whoever has the highest number wins. And of course, things can change depending on who you're allied with, and this is sort of a big deal. I don't know if this was in Dune or not, and I have mixed feelings about this, and I'll tell you why when I do my face-to-face talk with you. But these are ally advantage cards. So when you ally with someone, you will get these ally advantage cards, and they will give you special powers depending on who your allies are. Now, these powers are very useful, extremely useful. They're basically toned down versions of the racial powers here. So, for example, the Jolnar can let your allies see one of the attack cards or leader cards that they're going to play before battle, or the number, or the leader they're using, or whatever. So that's extremely powerful in the sense that you have all this information. The Lazeks can subsidize their allies during the bidding phase so that they already have a ton of money because they get that money from buying those strategy cards, so they can subsidize an ally. And yes, if you subsidize an ally and they win, the Lazeks get that money right back. We found that to be a bit over the top. Oh yeah, give me 6 and I'll buy that card, and the 6 goes right back into your coffers. That was a bit of a stretch. So these ally cards are extremely powerful. Now you can win in many different ways. For a single person, you need to get 3 of those strongholds. And like I said, there's 1 on each corner of the board and 1 in the middle. 3. If you ally with 2 people, 2-person alliance has to get 4 of them. A 3-person alliance, and that's the maximum number you can have in an alliance, has to get all 5 on the board. So it gets progressively harder the more people you get into an alliance. Now the one thing I will also, and so if you get all 5 you win. Okay, whoopee! If nobody, the game only goes 8 rounds, only 8. It's actually a long game, even though 8 rounds, it sounds limited. The game goes 8 rounds, and so if nobody wins, then usually the soul will win if they hold 2 different locations, or nobody holds these 2 different locations. Then if they don't win, Hakan will win. And if Hakan isn't there to win, then you go with the most strongholds, who wins. But so there's different ways you can win. Now, again, the X-Cha can win by predicting that somebody else will win in a certain round. You also have an optional rule to use these betrayal cards, and they have numbers on them to show if you do whatever it is, that you will win instead. So if you're in an alliance, for example, and your alliance wins, and you get what's on this card, you can actually say, no, my alliance doesn't win, only I win. Like control the populace. This says, if allied with other players, you may steal the victory if you control more spaces than each of your allies. That's pretty hard. So let's say 2 people did that in your alliance, which means you have a really traitorous alliance, and they got the 4 and you got the 5. Well, the person who got the 5 would win. So they're different things, and they're hidden, and you get assigned one in the beginning of the game. They're a way to sort of say, well, instead of the alliance winning, I had a secret objective, and I did that instead, so I win, and I fooled my alliance into doing this for me. Well, okay. That's an optional rule, and I think some people will really love it and other people will really detest it. The one thing I will say is your best bet would be to basically write down which one you have, even though you're not supposed to write down things, and then put them all out so that everybody can see those cards that are available, so that you know what other people might be working for. Otherwise, if you're not familiar with these cards, you're not going to have any fun because you're seeing somebody's doing something, but you don't know what they're doing, so you have no way to stop them if you think that they're being a traitor to you. That'll depend on that's very highly dependent upon your way of doing things, on how you like to play. There are the different influence cards. Some of them there are 2 events, and then there are basically just places that tell you where the influence and how much. There's 2 places per turn, so that'll tell you how much. There's the Soul Offensive, which will blow up a place. And then the most important is this temporary ceasefire, and during that you can form your alliances. And you can do 2-player alliances, you can do 3-player alliances, and you can only form them and break them when you get that card. So let's say you have 3 strongholds in your alliance, and you are the one, so you have 3, and your friend has 1, so you have 4 strongholds and you're a 3-person alliance, you're almost going to win. Well, one of those cards comes up and you can break that alliance and you've now got 3 and you're a sole player. And if you can survive that turn, then you'll win. So it's a way to break the alliance if you think that you can suddenly win by yourself, if you're that type of person who wants to change up things and likes to win solely rather than the alliance. So I think that is an option that is very neat. That's, of course, part of the game that has been part of the game from Dune. They also have these sort of side things, the giant coaster for the first player. That thing is huge. We made fun of that because it was quite large. And then this is a tile that you put in a 4-player game to block off a piece of the board so that it no longer exists. So that's to make the board a little smaller. It takes off one of your strongholds. Well, that's pretty much it for the components. They're actually very nice components. The one thing I do not like at all is the leader system going into there. It sticks getting them out. Pushing them in's fine. Sticks getting them out. I'm thinking over multiple plays, that's going to fray on the edge there. And then I think the better bet would be to just simply, when you're doing it, to hold it like this, and then when you put it down, you just make sure you be honest about it. If you're playing with people who are going to lie about which one they put on there, then you're probably playing with the wrong people. So I think it's better if you want to save that and not get it frayed or break this here, then you probably want to just hold it down rather than push it in. Well, I'm going to clean this up and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I think about the game in general. Okay, well, Rex is a little bit hard to review in a sense. Particularly if you aren't a Dune player. If you haven't played Dune, which I haven't, and it may be easier to review in that sense in that you're not comparing it, but I did play it with Dune players, and so that did color my... I think you have to, though. If you want a good review, not if you want to be a good player, but if you want to be a good reviewer, you need to play it with somebody who knows Dune. And so from the standpoint, let me first talk about the game itself, then I'll talk about how I think it relates to for the Dune crowd out there. The game itself is quite good. It is your classic, you can tell the older 70s roots because it is a classic game of backstabbing, a classic game of alliances and area control. It reminds me a lot of a more complex diplomacy, which of course has its roots in the same era, really, as the old Dune game. So it is that sense of everything's hidden, everything is there's limited movement across a board, but every move is very important. You only have in diplomacy you have forever to do it, but in this game you only have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of resources. You're always going to be light, particularly certain races are going to be light on the resources. Other races will have tons, but they'll be wanting to use their resources in the best possible way. Some people get a lot of free men, but not a lot of money, and other people don't get a lot of free men, but get a lot of money. So you're always constantly balancing out the need for units and money. For example, Sol doesn't hardly get any money, but doesn't really need it as much because they free deploy and they get tons of free men. They get 3 free men in this game. Whereas Lazex get fewer free men, but they have tons of money to then buy back their men and to also buy strategy cards. So I do think that the interplay is very neat. It's old school. It's retro in a sense that certain sides have certain powers that break the rules, other sides have other powers that break the rules. Now, I think this game really requires, I know everybody says this, with the right people, with the right gamers, you're going to have a great time. But this is a very, very true statement for Rex, and probably was true for Dune as well. But for the right crew, if you have the right crew, you're going to have a great time. I think you need the shifty guys who really want to win on their own and really want to find the best thing for them. If you have a crew that's fine with alliance victories, I always felt this was the same way. Again, I'm thinking about diplomacy here. I always felt this was the same way with diplomacy, where if you had a person who really wanted to win on their own, if you had several people like that, then it made the game a lot more interesting, because then alliances were sort of a fleeting thing. And in Rex, that can be a problem because you may want the alliance to be a fleeting thing, but then you never get that temporary ceasefire to break your alliance, so that can be a limiting factor, and that's completely up to the draw of the cards. In one game, you could have the temporary ceasefire the very first card drawn, which is what happened in the game I played with some Dune fans. The first card drawn, we had alliances from the very first turn before we even moved. Otherwise, you might not get a temporary ceasefire till later in the game, drawing these cards. So I think that in some ways it's a problem, because I think that you want to have a few turns where you're solo, where you're really trying to work it out on your own. And then when an alliance pops up, you have a chance to look at the board and say, okay, now here's where we are, and now the best thing would do is to have a two-person alliance, because when you're playing a six-player game and the alliance card draws the very first turn, you're going to go 3 and 3. You're very rarely going to go. You might do 2, 2, and 2, but you're very rarely going to. Particularly if a three-person alliance already springs up, it's going to be very difficult to do a 3, 2, and 1. The one guy is going to feel a little left out. Although it'll be much easier for him or her to win, but theoretically, but they have to fight uphill with all of the different alliances. So I think that random card draw of the alliance, and that's not necessarily of Rex, that's just of the game system, can be a problem if you don't like random, because nothing else is luck-driven in this game. Everything else is relatively non-luck-driven. I mean, other than what weapons and defense cards come up, that's somewhat luck-driven, but that's more of you have to base your strategy on what those come up, and the Jolnar know what they are and what you can bid on. So that's interesting. What you really need are players who are going to be in it for themselves, but also be able to find good ways to use their powers to help their alliance provisionally, not too much. So in a sense, it's kind of like Battlestar Galactica when you're trying to play a game, but you only want to play it so far, because what if you turn into a Cylon later? So that's something I think if you have people who are good at being being traitors, but also can play nice with others, that's a nice thing. I have my gaming group, I'll be honest, one gaming group I think they were fine with Alliance but did never really want to be traitors. So you have this game where it just ends up being a clash of titans and sort of game of attrition. When you have 2, 3-person alliances and we're both very happy with who we're allied with and we're not really in it for ourselves and not really thinking about betraying anybody in the future, so it just becomes a clash of titans. The 3-player alliance is battle, battle, battle until something happens. And so that can be a little bit of a war of attrition. I think that if you have players who are... my other gaming group has a lot of players who aren't very aggressive, but they're very mistrusting. So in a sense, that was sort of fun, because, well, now do I trust you to subsidize me with that much money? Because you may then not use it all and then keep the money, and I can't do anything about it because I'm allied with you. So that's kind of nice when there's that sense of mistrust. But it doesn't really help if they never intend to betray. So like I said, you really need a gaming group that can get in this, who wants to be for themselves but also for the alliance. You need a gaming group who is into this sort of game. Otherwise, it's just going to be a sort of mundane area control game where 2 people play cards. The big problem that we found, and this comes with the Alliance Powers card, what I thought is the game played a little too much like a co-op game with it being a competitive game. And what I mean by that is, you know how you get the leader effect in the co-op game, where you have the one guy saying, you go here, you go here, you go here, and you go here? That is extremely bad in Rex. Particularly, for example, one of the alliances we had the money generators allied, and then we had the information people allied. So we had the Jolnar, the Jolnar, the Letnev, and I want to say Harkonnen, because the Letnev are the Harkonnen. The Jolnar, the Letnev, and the X-Cha. All of these are very good at strategy cards and information and sort of subterfuge. telling other people what they can play, seeing what they can play. So during a battle, it became sort of a 5 to 10 minute thing where, okay, do you want to see the leader? Do you want to see the number? You tell him not to play this, and then you play your traitor card, and then we'll win the battle. So, well, what traitor cards do you have? Do you think you can do it? And it just becomes this sort of one guy's telling everybody, you know, what to do and how much to do, and then it becomes this very numerical game of if you put 5 and we kill the leader and we play this card, then you'll win the battle. I'm sorry, that wasn't very enjoyable to me. Some people will love it because it's all that math, it's all that, you know, thinking about the exact strategy you need, and if you don't worry too much about the leader effect where one guy's telling everybody else, but you play that number 5, I'll tell you what leader card, I'll look at their leader card, their leader token, and then you play the energy rifle. If you don't mind that, where the leader effect, and you really like that mechanical, we can win the battle if we do these steps, then you'll be alright. To me, I found it to be a little bit over the top, which is sort of why I don't like games like Power Grid, where you're constantly in your head thinking, the numbers I need to win if I maximize my number here and minimize my number there. So that was not very enjoyable to me, and that was sort of a 3-on-3 alliance thing. When you have smaller alliances, you don't have as many of these ally powers, so you kind of have a nice little back and forth with 2 people, and I think that's better. And it also depends, again, on your players, and if they're going to be the type that are really going to want to think it through and make sure that you succeed on all numerical fronts, well, all right, then that's fine if your players are like that. So I think that the alliance power cards are a little bit over the top in a sense. Then they lead to this crazy interplay that becomes almost overly mechanical because you want to make sure that every aspect of your alliance power comes into play whenever you can. So it may also exacerbate that one guy directing problem, particularly depending on what the alliance powers are, because some of them are clearly more useful in certain situations. So I didn't particularly like the alliance powers, and I think someone told me that they were a new addition to Dune, or at least changed from Dune. I don't know if that's true or not. I'd have to ask again. Maybe they're modified at least. So I think that the alliance powers were a little too disruptive in a sense, making the game more of a mechanical thing than it was a sort of subtle mind game. And I think you can make it into a subtle mind game where you're lying about, well, we're going to play the energy rifle. Well, they never had an energy rifle in the first place. So there is a way that you can subtly make that into, again, the game of treachery and betrayal. I think if you're way comfortable with your alliance and you don't ever intend to betray anybody, well, then that becomes more of that mechanical game, because then you want that person to win. Now, if you're thinking about breaking the alliance, then maybe, well, I don't know if I really want my ally to win, because next turn I'm just going to drop them like a bad habit so I can win instead of them. So I think if you're playing that sort of metagame where you want them to win but don't want them to win, then you can definitely have less of that leader effect and less of that ally power thing. But if your group is very content with having a 3-person win, then I think you're going to see that. You're going to see them maximize, because that's just the smart thing to do. So I will say that as far as an area control game, I'm not sure that Rex is my favorite game. It was neat, and what was really strange to me was playing a 4-person game and playing a 6-person game and comparing those two. So I thought about this because I thought clearly when I was playing these games that the more players would be better. I didn't find that to be the case. The 6-person game was like drudgery to me in a sense, because we had too many of those leader powers. It was a clash of the titans. We had money versus intel, and it just kept. It was one turn, one side would have won, and they only lost because of the traitor cards. They only lost because we happened to have the traitor cards. Now, the Barony of Letnev, which has more traitor cards, was on on my side, so that clearly helped. He also had the double agent card, which did add a little bit of luck because he then drew a new traitor card, which just happened to be the traitor card we needed. So that did add a little bit of luck to that, which I think some people will not like. So it became this thing where one turn they were going to win, we were doing poorly, and then the next turn we rallied and then we won. We won the next turn. It was either us winning one turn, or it was either they all out win or on one turn, or their all out win, or our all out win on the second turn. And I don't know, that wasn't all that enjoyable to me. The 4-player game was a whole lot more fun for some reason. We were after each other, we were back and forth. We did have at least one turn where we didn't have alliances, which I think helped out. But we were after each other, we were back and forth, we were trying to go here. It was a sort of struggle. That one alliance really focused on one member of my alliance and really blasted him good, and then he could never really recover in enough time. But it wasn't quite the one-sided game till right the very end. We still thought we might be able to pull it off. And so I think the 4-player game actually was a smoother game, less of that leader effect, less of the overpowered alliance power cards, and just made it a bit more smooth. Now, I think odd numbers are going to play oddly here, because you're either going to get one person who isn't allied, or you're going to get 3 versus 2, and yes, it is easier to win in a 2-person alliance, so you don't have to get all 5. But I think people are not going to have as much fun because you're going to be, it's either going to be a slog where they continuously, the 5-player game continuously blocks you from winning, the 3-person alliance from winning, by simply keep focusing on taking one of those strongholds away, or it's just going to be a steamroll where the 3 people easily steamroll the 2. I could see both sides happening, and I think that you're going to not have quite as much fun if you do it this way. If you do it at an odd number, I really don't think you could play 3-player effectively. I mean, it's just, you either all play, I don't see how it could be overly fun, because part of the game is really having this diplomacy underneath it, and being able to interplay the betrayal aspect and interplay. Otherwise, you're just looking at a game that is a area control game that's a little bit more of a slog than other area control games. I mean, if you want to play an area control game, there are many out there that are in some ways better if you're removing that betrayal, removing that diplomacy aspect. It'd be like playing 3-player diplomacy in a sense. I think there's a lot of comparison between Rex and diplomacy, in a sense that they're all about making, although diplomacy is much more betrayal going on in that one, because you're not locked into the alliances. So from the perspective of the Dune players that I had, they did not like Rex as much as Dune. And that was because I think some of the near and dear things that were in Dune got removed. So there aren't any more of the trash strategy cards, la 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 la. There are not any more of that the Bene Gesserit side can actually use, but nobody else can. So that's all gone. I think the X-Cha has been changed, which is the analog to the Bene Gesserit, has been changed so that they aren't maybe as useful or powerful as the Bene Gesserit. They can only free deploy to the Galactic Council, not anywhere where somebody else as a spiritual advisor, anywhere where somebody else deploys. So that, in a sense, has changed and become a little bit different. I think, and the prediction element is neat, but I mean, the X-Cha, just like the Bene Gesserit, I mean, I don't think they win that way a lot, unless they're very good at manipulating the other players. But since everybody knows they can predict when and win through that, it is something to be careful about. Always being careful about these extra victory conditions is something that is kind of neat about the game. I think everybody said they liked the Dune board better than the Arkham Horror, except me, and I've not played Dune, and I don't like the way the Dune board looks from the different iterations. I think it's very hard to tell where the sectors are, but it's much easier to tell where the storm is going to go because it's a circle. And in this, it's not so much easy to tell where the Soul Fleet's going to go. You really have to sit there and think. So I think Dune, in a sense, everybody liked the Dune board better who had played Dune. Also, I think people were just not as content with the theme. It didn't mean anything to them. A lot of Dune fans are going to really like the Dune unless you've read God Emperor of Dune, which is a terrible book, and you can write horrible comments about my comment there. But if you're a Dune fan, either movies or you've read the first 2 books, which are great books, then maybe you can, then maybe that won't mean anything to you. The Rex won't mean anything to you. I love Twilight Imperium, so I like the races and I like the story, and I read the story in the book, so it meant something to me, and I knew who the Lazics were, and I knew who the Soul and the Letnef were. So that meant something to me, although I'm a huge Dune fan, the movies and the first 2 books, so I would have just as easily liked to see Fremens and the Harkonnen and the Atreides and things like that. So I think that in a sense that the Dune people, the big thing the Dune people said was, if I have my copy of Dune and it's still in good condition, and I have a copy of Rex, I'm going to pick the copy of Dune every time. So that may be something for you Dune owners out there. If you own Dune, you may not want to pick up Rex. It may not be worth your money. I'm going to say it's probably not worth your money, because you might not like it as much, and if you've got Dune and it's good condition, go ahead and play Dune. It's basically the same game with some additional elements. Dune, I think, has more elements. It depends. There's some additional elements to Rex that are completely off left field from Dune. So how do I come to summary? If you're going to summarize this, did I like the game? I liked the 4-player game. Did I like the 6-player game? Not so much. I think it was a slog. I think it was a war of attrition. I don't think that I didn't get a chance to play a 5-player game, but I don't think that it would be nearly as fun as a 4-player game, and probably be a little more unwieldy than the 6-player games I've played. So I think in a sense, you're looking at even numbers here. You're looking at having the right type of gaming group, and I think this is very important for this one particularly. The pieces, everything is well done, and I do love the sort of Twilight Imperium skin of it, because I love Twilight Imperium. Some people will hate that. So I think that it's difficult to say if people are going to like it. If you're a huge Dune fan, it could go either way, particularly if you don't have a copy of Dune and you just need that fix, and you've played Dune and you need that fix and there's no way you can get a copy of Dune, then yeah, okay, Rex is probably a good way to go. I could actually see that if you substituted some of the cards, like printed out your own cards, you could really transform Rex into Dune if you wanted to. By changing up some house ruling it, if you just can't get that copy of Dune for less than $100 or whatever. So I think that it's a very situational game. I don't think if I had my other choices of area control or alliance-based games, I would pick Rex first, which is very disappointing because I was hugely excited about this new reprint of a classic game. So I don't think I would pick Rex first. If I had my right group, I think we would have a lot of fun. We did have a lot of fun the several times we played with the right group. But even one of the games where I would say I had fun, we actually just called the game early because we knew they were going to win. The other side was going to win. And there was no need to really just slog it out for another hour. We wanted to get to other games. We were going to play several games in a day. Now it took us about 3 hours, which I would say is a decent amount of time for any size game. Even a 6-player game took about 3 hours. So if your people know the game, it's easier. So that's good too. And we won. Both games were won by the 3rd or 4th round that I'm talking about that took 3 hours. So that's good. You're looking at 3 hours, 3 or 4 rounds. Of course, some games can be even longer if it becomes a slog. So even the game though that I would say, even the games that I said I had fun, the one game in particular I'm thinking of, we called it early. So that, I don't know if that shows that's a problem or not. I mean, if it becomes so self-evident that one side's going to win, then it's not worth going on. So there's some caveats. So Dune fans, if you don't have a copy of Dune and you really want to relive your glory days of Dune, then okay, yeah, I'd say Rex is definitely worth looking at. If you have a group that doesn't care for a betrayal mechanism or a traitor mechanism, this is not the game for you. If you don't like area control and diceless games, this is not the game for you. If you like area control, then you really need to think about it because, like I said, I think there are better area control games out here. I don't necessarily think that one of the players that was a real big fan of Dune thought that maybe the reskinning was what changed the game to be more of a slog. I don't know. I'm not sure I would enjoy Dune either as much as other area control games. So it's very difficult for me to say if it was just the reskin here for Rex or the Dune rules in general. So hopefully that helps you think it through. I want you to think it through before buying on this one because it is a very situational game. And like I said, if I had my choice between this and other area control games, particularly with the wrong type of people, I would certainly pick the other ones. I'm not so sure that Rex will hit the table as much as I want it to. So that's my thoughts. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time for a new game. Have a good one and play on.